Hello there and welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a look at our first type of multi-layer EXR that comes from CG. We're going to look at what I call the material properties split out. Now, a material property split out comes with a certain set of aovs. And when I say aovs, that's interchangeable with the term layers. An aov is an arbitrary output variable. It's an extra layer for us to use when we're compositing. And so what the material properties AOVs are, well, they're based on what the surface of your 3D object is. If you look through these, they're all varying properties of our materials. And so let's go ahead and get looking at all of them. We can make a layer contact sheet. We will turn on our layer names. So you can see we have our beauty here, and this is everything combined. We have coat, we have diffuse, we have specularity, we have directs and indirects of both of them. We have transmission, subsurface, and volume. So let's take a look at these one at a time so it's a little clearer what exactly we're looking at. So I'm going to make a shuffle node. And a handy trick that we can do, because we're going to end up having a lot of shuffle nodes as we're splitting these layers out and combining them together. What we can do is we can look at the name of this knob. We see it's called in1. And we can see what exactly we're looking at by typing in brackets and typing value in1. And these brackets mean this is a code that Nuke is going to look in and run, and it's actually telling us the value of this knob. This is an excellent way to organize nodes automatically if you want to see what certain knobs are doing at any given time. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and first look at our diffuse. So our diffuse properties are our non-reflective properties of our surface. They're not shiny. They're just your flat, rougher surfaces that are catching direct light. And our diffuse channel is split into two types of light. We have our direct light, and I'll copy and paste this here. And we have our indirect light, diffuse indirect. These are the secondary bounces that are affecting our diffuse. So we can see here that this green guy is pretty much entirely diffuse, where we don't have any diffuse properties in here. This glass is transmission, this is volume. And so our diffuse is currently made up of this red cup, our ground, and our rocky looking character over here. So let's go ahead. The way we can combine these two, now remember, light is additive, and so all we need to do is plus these two together. Make a little drop down here. And now we've combined our direct and indirect light, and this is a full diffuse pass. So you can see we don't have any of these kind of specular highlights, but we do have our main color within here. So that's excellent. We have our diffuse properties built. And let's go ahead and build our specular. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this setup. I like organizing this based on the material property that's going into them. So in this, we'll look at our specular. And so if we look here, we have all of the shiny reflective surfaces, our main shine pass, if you will. And you can see our rocky texture over here has some reflection in it. Our subsurface toy there has it. And all of these highlights are the direct reflection of lights that exist within our scene. Let's go ahead and change this to our specular indirect. And you can see this is very different from our specular direct. This is more the reflection of our objects themselves, where our specular direct is the reflection of our lights. And when you combine them, we get our total reflection pass together. And so now what we can do, again, we're just going to plus these together, make a dot node, and look at this. So let's AB with our beauty pass. And you can see we've rebuilt this green rocky character here completely. It looks exactly the same when you're ABing. And that's exactly what we want. So now what we could do, if we wanted to, is we could say, well, I actually wish this guy was twice as shiny. Well, what we can do is throw down a color correct, and let's just double the amount of shine. And now this is much more reflective, and we can kind of cheat how the material reacts. That's exactly what this is built for. We would typically have some sort of matte that we could use to isolate it just to this guy, but for the sake of example, we're affecting our whole entire image. So that's cool. We've made this much shinier. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off while we look at our other layers. So again, let's copy and paste this setup. I'll pipe it in here. And let's take a look. Next up, I want to look at our transmission. So transmission direct is typically always blank, but it's always good to have it just in case there's anything in it. Transmission is our glass. I'm going to go ahead and shuffle in our transmission indirect. And transmission is anything that's being refracted through glass-like objects. It's displaying the background. We can see how it's kind of distorting what's behind it in our image. And again, like everything else, we can just plus this over as we're slowly rebuilding our beauty pass. Guess I don't need that extra dot. I'll delete that. And now we just have that glass feeling in there. Very nice. And next up on our list of material properties, we can copy and paste all of this again. We have our subsurface scattering, that's SSS. We have our direct and our indirect. And as we combine these, we can see that together they roughly make this. We don't have our specularity in there yet. The subsurface direct is the main first pass of your subsurface scattering. And if you don't know what subsurface scattering is, it's when you have a semi-translucent material that bounces light around, and it can potentially change the color as it's going through the surface. Human skin is an excellent example. If you shine a flashlight right behind your palm, you'll see a red glow that's kind of bleeding through your hand, and that's subsurface scattering. And this direct channel represents your first kind of pass at subsurface, while this indirect is the secondary bounces that are happening on the inside. And so if we were to color correct this, let's go ahead and change our gain really quick. We can make it very blue, and you can see our secondary bounces in here are turning very blue. So let's go ahead, like the others, we will plus this over. And we'll AB. We're getting closer to rebuilding our final image. There's only a couple more things that we're missing. Now let's go ahead and copy and paste this again. We will rebuild our volume in the back. We have our volume direct and our volume indirect. And so again, the volume direct is the first ray of light that is hitting, and the volume indirect are the secondary bounces that occur. And volume indirect typically makes things feel more cloudy, or if you have an explosion or any kind of emission, that lighting will typically be found in the indirect channel. And so we can see here, this is making it feel much lighter and fluffier. We could add a color correct, gain it up, and make this feel very fluffy. So go ahead and leave that alone, slowly getting closer. We only have one more channel to make because this is just our HDR, and we don't actually really need that. And we are missing our reflection here. But why is that not in our split out? We have our quote-unquote reflections here in our specular pass. Well, certain materials, like car paint for example, have 2 layers of reflectivity, and I actually used a car paint shader on this glass. The main first reflection is your specular, but then your secondary is called your clear coat, or in the case of this renderer, just coat. So let's go ahead and find our coat direct, and we'll find our coat indirect. And you'll see these behave just like our specular pass did. It's just an auxiliary layer to have two different layers of specularity. And we'll plus this over again. And now you can see, if we full screen this, we have successfully rebuilt our beauty pass. And Arnold is just additive. It auto multiplies your lighting, and so you're just ready to go right out of the gate. So if we wanted to change any of these properties, we could very easily do that. If we wanted to make this glass reflection, whoops, more shiny. I accidentally went into our 3D viewer there. If you hit tab, you can get in and out of that. So let's make this more shiny by gaining it up. And you can just see that shine intensity is increasing in just our glass because that's the only place where it exists. We could color correct our volume separately if we wanted to make that a little nicer. But let's say we wanted to change the color of this character here. Well, what we could do is we could go to our diffuse because that's, you know, where all of our colors exist. And we could desaturate this. We'll pretend we have a mask and we're just affecting our dinosaur here. We could color correct it so it's more blue. Maybe we want it to be warmer. And you could do this, but the issue is we're also changing the colors of this lighting. And that's where the next pass comes in, because each of these actually has an albedo pass. And what is an albedo pass? Let's take a look. Pipe it in here, and we'll select diffuse albedo. And so what this is the raw color of our textures with no lighting applied to them. And why is this helpful? What can this do for us? Well, there's a few things. The first is if you just wanted to get a key on this green, you're better off keying this albedo pass than trying to key this lit diffuse pass. It would make it much simpler. You don't have to account for any gradations in lighting, and you can extract certain colors or objects if you'd like to. But the real power is when it comes to modifying our textures post-render. So what we can do is pipe in our diffuse direct and our diffuse albedo, and we can do a divide. I'm going to flip these really quickly. And something really interesting just happened. We've extracted our raw lighting pass. And this is incredibly powerful. So what can we do next? Let's go ahead and make a branch off to the side here. Make another dot. And let's go ahead and multiply this back really quick. And you'll see we get our original diffuse direct pass. So what can we do with this? Well, let's do what we talked about. Let's get a quick key on this green. We'll just roughly key the green channel. We'll end up grabbing the ground in this. I think that's fine. Not too worried about that. Actually, let's do a saturation keyer instead. That's much better. We have some saturation back there, but I don't really mind. I'll make a roto node and roughly make a shape here quick. I won't output an alpha, but I'll pre-multiply the alpha we currently have. Okay, so this is pretty close to what we want. So what we can do is we can now color correct our albedo pass. Let's go ahead and desaturate it and make it blue. Now when we look here, we've actually changed the color of our base image here, but we haven't affected our lighting. It has changed a little bit because this has a blue baseline, but we're not overall changing the color. We can now change this to any color that we'd like. and our lighting is going to respond to it appropriately. So we could use this instead of just our standard diffuse direct channel. And let's compare this to our beauty. Now when we look at the bottom here, you can see we still have some green in there. And why is that? Well, we still have this green diffuse indirect channel. So let's change where we're plussing this over. We're going to pipe that in there, and we are going to actually divide by our combined diffuse direct and indirect channel. And this will give us the raw lighting. The one caveat is these indirect secondary bounces, we're never really going to be able to change this color. So in this pink, for example, that wouldn't really work, but the green is fairly subtle on the ground. So let's see what exactly we get. We'll go to the bottom here, and you can see we've completely changed the color of this material. The reflection is still a little green, and that's not really something we're going to be able to fix in here. We could key it, but it's reflecting the original diffuse color. And so there is some great power that can be had with extracting your raw lighting and then remultiplying it by your albedo channel. But it is limited in its usefulness because secondary elements like reflections we cannot account for, because we do have an albedo layer for our other material properties. But the thing is, when you look at them, they're not entirely useful. When they're full white, if you divide by that, it's just going to give you the original image. The only layer or material type that I'm typically able to get this to work correctly is the diffuse channel, and even that comes with some hiccups sometimes. You can see our red cup is a special car paint material, so the lighting didn't get perfectly extracted from that. You can see our indirect bounce didn't get changed to just raw lighting. So there are a lot of little things that you can't necessarily change, but this is a trick I enjoy using when it comes to modifying colors slightly, when it comes to adding little bits of texture into your image. Let's actually look at that really quick. Let's add a little crack into the neck here and see exactly what that would look like. We can just roughly draw in a shape. It's not going to be perfect. Going to output RGBA. Let's change the color of it a little bit. Sure, we'll go with this. When we multiply it, it's being lit by our lighting. So there's some real power. You can change textures a little bit if it's a still image. And that's all thanks to material properties. So when do you want to use the material property flavor of split out? Well, you really want to use this when you don't really have your materials locked in, and admittedly you're a little down to the wire, and you want to be able to control those minute details like how shiny an object is, how much indirect bounce is being received, those sort of things. This definitely isn't as popular as it used to be. Most people do light passes now, but some places still use this type of split out. If you are using the material property split out, you need to make sure that your lighting is locked in, because you can't really change your lighting with the material split out setup. And so this is a conversation that needs to happen with whoever's doing the CG to figure out what sort of flexibility you need. Do you need to be able to increase indirect bounce, or do you need to be able to change the value of a given light? These are all decisions you make that will ultimately affect how flexible your setup is. And it's definitely best to plan ahead before you get your renders with AOVs that you don't want. And so that's a brief overview of how you use the material properties. There really aren't a ton outside of this. These are the standard ones you'll run into when you're using Arnold, at least. And one of the trickier things is that each renderer will handle these material properties a little bit differently. This is how Arnold works. I've had some experience with Redshift, and those look different. I've experienced some with Blender Cycles renders, and those work very differently. And so you need to do a little bit of research on how exactly to combine your layers, because ultimately, when you add all of your layers together, you need to make sure that they equal your beauty render. Typically, they'll all follow the same sort of system we have here, where you'll be multiplying raw lighting by the albedo for some, and then plussing the rest together. It really just depends on the render engine. So we're going to take a look at the next type of AOV split out that we can do, which is light passes. But first, we're going to take a look at the compositing fundamental of lighting. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.